The legend, which has been passed down through the mist and fogs of time about the existence of a continent in the Atlantic Ocean, is based on fact and is not a fanciful narrative promulgated by untold generations of storytellers seeking to enthrall and entertain and offer an explanation for the name of the ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The continent of Atlantis did, in fact, exist because those who know, the ascended masters of Earth's spiritual hierarchy, have said it is so, and they have had a great deal to say about it and its peoples. Please see what is an ascended master, anyway. Those guardians of the human race do not lie about such matters, or any matters, and so I will exert no effort in offering proof to what was chronicled in the ancient archives of the Egyptian initiate priests and was passed on to the Greek initiates by way of Solon and then Plato, lifetime of Lord Hilarion. Plato was a second-degree initiate and knew the history of the third and fourth root races, Lemurian and Atlantean, but he was pledged to secrecy and intentionally veiled his knowledge of Atlantis in allegory and illusion. As well, for the same reason, he mixed fact and fiction in describing Poseidonus, the final island, but calling it Atlantis. This writing will be starting with the premise that Atlantis was a reality and not a fable and move beyond any need for the cumbersomeness of proof. The Akashic records for Earth, on the upper astral and lower mental planes, are of immediate access to the cosmic mind of a perfected master, and what will follow are mere fragments of that record as far as the Atlanteans are concerned. Each sphere of evolution, the planets, in this solar system goes through 7 chains or septenate incarnations in its developmental progress, each chain having 7 planets. In other words, each planetary logos or life-providing entity for each of the planets incarnates 49 times and expresses as an evolutionary sphere with all its developing life forms. That divine expression is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Each septenary chain of planets undergoes 7 rounds of sequential evolution through each of the planets, 1 planet at a time, each round progressing through the 7 planets before the next round, and our current round for the Earth chain is the 4th or middle round, the densest in terms of physicality. The initial round is the most etheric for all of the life forms, and the physical density increases and progresses down toward the middle of the 4th round, ours, after which the rounds are progressively more etherealized up to the final 7th round. For a better understanding, go to 49 Earths and the Silent Watcher. If physical density and time were plotted on a graphic chart, the appearance of each 7-planet chain would be an elongated V with the 1st and 7th planets, or globes being at the 2 upper extremities and being the most spiritual and the least material. The lower point of the V would be the very middle of the chain, the 4th planet, the least spiritual and the most material of the entire evolution of the chain, such as the Earth we occupy. And as each planet of the chain is activated and enlivened by the Creator logos, its period of evolution is called a world period, during which there are 7 root races of the sentient species humanity that evolves over that period. The pattern of physical density/spirituality for the chain of planets is followed by the root races for each of the world periods. That is, the first root race is the most spiritual and the least physical, very ethereal, and the arc of evolution descends more and more into physicality toward the 4th root race, which we call the Atlanteans on our Earth sphere. Following the midpoint of the 4th race, millions of years ago, the arc ascends back upwardly toward spirituality and lessening physicality, density. The 7th root race of our world period will be the most spiritual and the least material. Since we are not far removed from the middle of the 4th race of the 4th planet of the 4th chain in the 4th round of that chain, relativistically, this is about as physically dense as it gets on planet Earth, and hence the challenge for a soul incarnating into such low and dense matter from the causal or highest mental plane. As mentioned, each world period has 7 root races of mankind, and each root race has 7 subraces, thus the microcosm perfectly reflecting the macrocosm of a septenary universe. Click on a septenary universe. So, the evolutionary scheme that we call Earth is a lot more complicated than a solitary planet suspended in the deep void of space. It has 7 chains of planets with 7 planets in each of the chains, and each of those chains undergoes 7 rounds of sequential evolution through each of its planets. These planets are at different dimensional levels, and as the life wave and evolutionary impulse reach each planet, it undergoes 7 major stages of evolution for its life forms during its period of enlivened activity. Just as the creative source for this universe differentiated into 7 primary aspects of itself, so the solar logos, creator of the solar system, projected forth a septenary creational scheme within its ring pass knot. There are 7 planetary logoi of the 7 sacred planets within the system, and these 7 spirits before the throne administer the dissemination of the 7 rays, one for each of them, throughout the system, and have incarnated within their own septenary evolutionary schemes that we call planets. Be it Venus or Jupiter or Neptune, each has a 7-fold chain of 7 multidimensional globes, and each chain has 7 rounds through the 7 globes of the chain. But coming back down to the Earth that we all know, most of the current humanity are the 5th sub-race of the 5th root race, which is called the Aryan, and that is not exclusively the Caucasian. For this 4th round that we are in, on the 4th planet in the chain, the first 2 root races were so ethereal and of such indefinite form that they cannot be considered to be part of the human evolution on this planet, as we understand human. They had their purpose in the mind of the planetary logos, but the very first beginnings of the human kingdom and evolution were in the middle of the 3rd root race, or what is called the Lemurian, 18 million years ago. They lived on a vast continent in the Pacific Ocean called the Motherland of Mu, and because of the lemur monkey found on both sides of the Pacific by zoologists in the 19th century, a Pacific continent was postulated as an explanation and called by them Lemuria. The early sub-races of the 3rd root race were more animal than man and had not even the germ of mind, but rather lived totally by animal instincts and were exceedingly primitive when compared to more modern man. They were oviparous and have been called the egg-born in the occult annals of history, that is, they reproduced the species by the formation of eggs, which incubated the fetus for several years. They were also soulless. Over the millions of years, the 4th sub-race of the 3rd root race had evolved to becoming hermaphroditic, which means that each individual had the sexual apparatus of both male and female. In appearance, these anthropoids would be more ape-like than human-like, and their size was enormous by modern standards. As the eons passed, the size very steadily and slowly diminished. The entire period for the 7 sub-races of the Lemurians was roughly 12 million years, and in the middle of the 4th sub-race Sanat Kumara came with his Lords of the Flame from Venus to accelerate and alter the course of evolution on this sphere forever, referred to who as Sanat Kumara. This was the first great crisis in this planet's history, and the result of the creational work, Kriya Shakshi, of the 7 Kumaras and the high initiates from Venus with the help of the Deva evolution, was the separation of the sexes, the implantation of the germ of mind, the individualization of the race, and the ensouling of the species, all as a direct consequence of Sanat Kumara's presence. An embryonic mental body was given to the 4th Lemurian sub-race. The male and female sexual polarities were differentiated out from the former androgynous condition, self-awareness was derived out of the former group consciousness, and the waiting soul entities found the more advanced animal men to be more appropriate vehicles, and receptacles, for being ensouled. This was the very beginning of the human race on Earth 18 million years ago and a powerful initiation for the planetary logos. To clarify, the race had had an oversouling entity for the entire race up to that point in time, as with species of animals, but the individualization occurred when one soul or higher self, or solar angel, entered each individual physical being of the 3rd root race. The sexual separation didn't happen overnight but rather slowly over time as the Deva builders of form nature did their work in manifesting the creative thought form projected by the Kumaras, see thought forms in magical work. The final 3.5 sub-races of the Lemurians had 6 million years, then, to work on the perfecting and understanding and control and coordination of the human physical body under the supervisory guidance of the spiritual hierarchy who incarnated amongst them and taught the race go to who are the spiritual hierarchy. The goal for the race was the development and perfection of the physical vehicle, which over eons entailed the integration of the etheric body. Click on the etheric body with the dense physical body and the lowering of the consciously controlled body processes below the threshold of consciousness. For a very long time, the 3rd race had conscious control over physiological functions that we take for granted as being automatic and under the control of the autonomic nervous system. In keeping with the divine plan of the planetary logos, higher self of Sanat Kumara, the so-called Lemurian race passed out of the evolutionary scheme to make way for the fourth root race and the next stage of growth for early humankind. As with all transitions from one sub-race to the next and one root race to the next, the latter was built on the genetic structure of the former and would undergo its modifications over time, so there was always overlap, and the vanguard of the new race could be considered Lemuro-Atlantean. The great continent of Mu was destroyed by the element of fire with massive volcanic and subterranean explosions that sent the land mass to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean in a drawn-out series of events, but not all at once. Before it happened, the new race to be was guided to establish colonies on portions of the Mu motherland which would survive the convulsions of the planet, that is, in the North and South Atlantic. The entire surface of the planet was radically altered by the submergence of Mu and, besides the new Atlantean home for the new race, a few remnants of Lemuria and the seventh sub-race of the third root race remained in New Zealand, Australia, Madagascar, Borneo, New Guinea, and various islands scattered across the Pacific, also much of California. The entire continent of Africa arose from the sea floor as Mu sank into the oceanic waters. This would be roughly 12 million years ago when the first Atlantean sub-race was getting its start as the new race of man for planet Earth, and getting its feet wet in a manner of speaking. All these tectonic plate shiftings and geophysical events are overseen and orchestrated by the Manu of Earth's spiritual hierarchy, utilizing the first-ray energy of power, the destroyer aspect, and the powerful Deva helpers with their elemental subordinates. Secret words of power, visualization, thought forms, and projection of the will are used to draw the Devas and elementals into producing the world-shaking events that have ultimately been requested by the Lord of the World, Sanat Kumara. The territory of what later came to be called Atlantis stretched across much of North America and throughout the North and South Atlantic Ocean. A new phase of human development had begun, commensurate with the master plan of Sanat Kumara. The new fourth root race would have the destiny and challenge of creating the emotional body, astral body, expanding it, perfecting it, and integrating it with the dual physical form, the dense physical and the etheric physical bodies. This would take millions of years and 7 sub-races to accomplish, but it would be successful beyond the expectations of the hierarchy. The mind or mental body was not a factor, because that was to be left to the fifth root race, Aryan, to develop. For more, go to the astral body. These early Atlanteans were not thinkers, they had very little mental equipment or capacity. They lived in the now moment, ate, slept, reproduced, and carried out the biological functions of the physical body but had little more thinking capacity than the higher animals of the time. They were guided all the way, and in all things, by incarnate members of the Great White Brotherhood, who were the divine kings and priest teachers of the race. The spiritual and governing leaders of the Atlanteans intuited the necessary guidance and governance from higher levels, and the masses of non-thinkers blindly followed because they both needed and wanted to be told what to do. The reasoning powers of the mind were not on the agenda for them. Development came one step at a time, and the astral body would take millions of years to develop, of course accompanied by all the emotions and the desire nature. It is little known that Earth is a rare emotional experiment in the galaxy, so the Atlantean phase of creating and integrating the astral body into the sentient life experience was a very important one with galactic repercussions to all the observers from other planetary civilizations. These things used to be secrets of initiation, but the cat has been let out of the bag by Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey as instructed by their masters, El Morya and Kuthumi respectively, to awaken a humanity with a mental apparatus now capable of assimilating and understanding the higher meaning of these former secrets. There were giants in the land in those days. The genetic carryover from the Lemurians produced gigantic physical forms compared to the modern physique. The size of the first sub-race was the greatest, with the steady diminishing of stature down through the sub-races over millions of years. They were strong, they were beautiful of form, and they were big. The continent of the fourth root race was enormous, so there wasn't any homogeneity of racial form throughout, and the skin coloration was variously white, yellow, brown, and red, with admixtures of those as certain long segregated tribes encountered others of a different complexion. The early sub-races were endowed with a third eye which they inherited from the Lemurians. I know, it sounds far-fetched. They had 2 eyes in the front of the head and 1 in the back of the head, the so-called Cyclopean eye, but the third eye was functional only for spiritual sight, clairvoyance and mystical visions of the unseen worlds. It didn't register the visual wavelengths of the then physical world. This third eye, Eye of Shiva, gradually disappeared from the outward anatomy by the time of the third subrace of the Atlanteans and became incorporated into the brain as what we now call the pineal gland, of which little is known to medical science. Its psychic perceptions continued to function until nearly the end of the fourth root race, but by then became totally non-functional due to the materiality, depravity, and corruption of the race, except in the higher initiates. Until the Atlanteans came along, there was no astral plane, with 7 subdivisions, around planet Earth. God or the planetary logos did not create the astral planes. That was done by the millions and millions of Atlanteans individually and collectively as they gradually became astrally polarized in the emotions and all of their immense desires. They developed astral consciousness out of the former physical plane consciousness of bodily preoccupation inherited from the Lemurians. The kamic or desire body, astral, became the total focus for their attentions, as was planned, and the astral body became the dominant conditioning influence in their lives, leading to excessive emotionality and rampant, insatiable desires, not planned. Of course, this took place over millions of years and 7 subraces and many tribal offshoots of those subraces. The astral plane, ever in expansion with the thought forms of man, became the constant and daily focus of their attention, because that is the state or plane of consciousness upon which is found the astral body, and they lived their lives, for all intents and purposes, in the astral body. The astral plane is also known, to those who know, as the plane of illusion and desire. The uncountable thought forms inhabiting it have been constructed by fanciful imagination and never-ending desires for things of the material life and the material world. Over time they became consumed by desire, initially desirousness for the satisfactions and pleasures of the physical form and later for the possessions of others. The astral proclivities got out of all control, and the great sin or transgression of the race became that of theft of the belongings of others. There was no conscience or morality, except for initiates in the temple schools, and no discriminative ability to ascertain the difference between right and wrong, because their minds were infantile and unable to reason or think logically. They just took what they wanted regardless of how it would impact the original owner. You see, the entire race was exceedingly psychic, having the lower form of psychism, which is mediated through the solar plexus center, or chakra, which has a direct connection to and is the outlet for the energies of the emotional/astral body. If need be, review the astral body. The psychism is a consequence or side effect from the polarization in the astral form, and their clairvoyance and clairaudience would give them full access to the phenomena of the astral plane. However, they didn't know or comprehend the illusional nature of what they found there. They just couldn't tell the difference between what was real and what was illusion on the astral plane, which sounds like a pretty confusing state of affairs.